Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking into a really compelling and sometimes, well, quite stark social movement from South Korea. It's called the 4B movement. Our mission here is to understand it. What is it? Why did it start? What are the experiences of the women involved? And what does it mean for South Korea, maybe even beyond? We've gone the transcripts from a DW documentary, so we've got some detailed perspectives and facts to work with.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating, I think, is how it captures both these deep societal issues and this really radical kind of resistance. We'll dig into the history, the culture that sort of led to 4B, and also look at some personal stories that really bring its impact to life.
Okay, let's unpack this. The material we looked at jumps right in. Describing life is pretty difficult for women in South Korea. Talking about discrimination, abuse, being treated like second citizens. What's the background here?
Well, if you look at the bigger picture, South Korea is often described as deeply patriarchal. And this isn't just, anecdotes. The source points out that men tend to hold more power, more influence, and women face serious hurdles, things like domestic violence, discrimination at work, a really significant gender pay gap. Plus, there's this huge pressure to marry and have children. But government support is often lacking, and women are still very underrepresented in politics, like in parliament.
And the documentary brings up some statistics that are, well, they're pretty shocking. Rates of sexual harassment, cyberbullying, violent assault, described as shockingly high, sometimes higher than the global average. And then there was that one specific event that seemed to really act as a catalyst.
Yes, that raises a key question. What was the tipping point? In 2016, there was a truly brutal murder near Gangnam Station's Exit 10, a young woman killed by a stranger. And while the killer was caught and sentenced, the official view wasn't that it was a misogynistic hate crime. It was framed more as an isolated case. But the public reaction, particularly among women, it turned this awful incident into what the source calls a historical point. It made women feel ready, maybe more determined to speak out.
And the roots of this patriarchy, they run deep, right? The source mentioned a specific historical system.
Oh, absolutely. Until 2008, which really isn't that long ago, there was the Hoju system.
Huh?
This legally made men the head of the family, the sole authority. It entrenched these very rigid gender roles, and its influence, it's still felt in many parts of South Korean society today. It's really crucial context for understanding where 4B came from.
Okay, so with all that as a backdrop, in 2018, this radical feminist movement, 4B, emerges. Our source gives us the core definition. What exactly does 4B mean?
Right, so 4B apparently started with an anonymous Twitter post. It stands for 4 no's, no sex, no dating, no marriage, and no childbirth. The documentary notes it's like a sex strike, but it is not 100% about it. It describes it as a very Korean feministic lifestyle and significantly calls it irreversible. The idea was to, quote, get rid of these 4 things to find a breakthrough, because in their view, these things are overrepresented in women's life.
Irreversible. That's a really strong word. It suggests this isn't just a phase or a temporary protest for these women.
Exactly. It implies a finality, a deep personal conviction. It's not just about opting out for a while. It's about fundamentally changing their life's direction, permanently breaking away from expectations they see as oppressive or harmful. It's a very definitive stance.
And the source gives us a specific example, Min Young Lee. Tell us a bit about her.
Yeah. Min Young Lee is a simultaneous interpreter. She lives this 4B lifestyle. She shares an apartment, even a communal workspace. With other women, they're all language teachers. They support each other, professionally and personally. Her story reflects what many perhaps feel she described herself as being shy, afraid of misogyny. But finding 4B gave her this fire, as she put it. It changed her perspective, made her feel she could actually reject things I don't like and step away from those societal pressures.
So beyond just the 4 no's, what other ways does this resistance show up? The documentary highlights some concrete examples.
Right. It's not just about refusal. We see things like Seoul's first strength training studio just for women. And even the way it's advertised, discreet signage that tells you something about the climate, where even women exercising can be controversial. The goal there is explicitly stated, raise up their self-esteem.
Right.
Women wanting to be themselves, not wife anymore, or girlfriend, or other men anymore. It's about self-prioritization, community building.
And it seems this resistance pops up in academia too. Female students taking a stand.
Yes, there's a specific case mentioned at Seoul Women's University. A professor was accused of sexual harassment. It apparently took months of student protests before he resigned. And the university itself, pretty much silent throughout the process. A feminist student union spokesperson called it disappointing that the university didn't take the right steps on its own. It really underlines why collective action feels necessary for them. Students use posters saying things like, no space for sex offenders. It shows why 4B might find fertile ground even there.
So it really sounds like women are actively forging new kinds of communities, new support systems.
Absolutely, like Minyoung and her housemates learning languages together. The documentary describes it as women helping other women learn as many languages as possible, as quickly as possible. They're sharing knowledge, using their skills, building this solidarity, described as weapons for the future. Minyoung herself sounds hopeful, saying, there are women who are changing very fast every day, day by day.
Okay, this brings us to a really important part, looking at different views. Because 4B sounds pretty extreme. Not everyone is going to agree with it, right?
Definitely not. And that's a key question. How is it seen by others? The documentary makers noted that most men were unwilling to talk with us about feminism. And for many they did speak to, it was the first time they'd even heard of 4B. Some men questioned needing women-only spaces or felt that, it's not good to reject things in such an extreme way.
And we also hear from some younger men who seem to feel, well, maybe left behind or disadvantaged.
Yes, that perspective comes through. Some expressed frustration about mandatory military service and a feeling that opportunities for men, maybe in top universities, are shrinking, even though women can apply anywhere. The source connects this feeling to intense neoliberal competition. A feeling of insecurity, maybe no safety net, which can then lead to fear or even resentment towards women's progress. Studies mentioned suggest this insecurity can manifest as contempt.
But it's not just men who have reservations. Some feminists also critique the 4B approach.
That's right. Siren Nunyoung Chong, who is an artist and anthropologist studying historical women-only theater, Yosun Kukuk, it's called.
An earlier form of female community. Interesting.
Exactly. So while she sees the historical links between feminism and, say, the LGBTQ+ scene, she finds 4B supporters extreme. She specifically critiques what she sees as an intense focus on self-optimization. Things like saving money, investing heavily, buying luxury goods. She calls it hyper-capitalism. Her point seems to be if the main goal is just individual wealth and status, they're missing the point. She argues that focusing only on individual success isn't enough to bring about real political, systemic change.
So we have this movement, 4B.
Yeah.
It's seen as small by some, definitely uncompromising, controversial. But is it having a broader effect on South Korean society anyway?
Well, according to Professor Hung Jae-lee, a feminist philosophy researcher cited in the documentary, yes. She suggests the wider feminist movement is definitely gaining ground. And she says, even women who don't openly call themselves feminists are now partly living by the principles of the 4B movement. And adds, significantly, there are quite a few of them too. So the ideas might be spreading beyond the core group.
And maybe the most dramatic piece of evidence for some kind of shift, mentioned right in the source, is the birth rate.
Yeah, this is impossible to ignore. South Korea's birth rate. It hit the lowest level in the entire world in 2023. Just 0.72 children per woman.
Wow, 0.72.
Which is drastically below the 2.1 needed just to keep the population stable. You have to see that decline as reflecting the choices countless women are making. Whether they call themselves 4B or not, they're clearly opting out of traditional marriage and childbirth roles in huge numbers. It aligns with those core 4B ideas, consciously or not.
But even with these major shifts like the birth rate plummeting, it sounds like actual gender equality. There's still a long road ahead.
Oh, absolutely. The documentary makes that clear at the end. Things like sexual offenses, deepfake pornography, they're apparently still rising. So yeah, gender equality is still a distant goal. But you do see the beginnings of change, real change, being driven by a generation of women who are often better educated, have a clearer idea of equality, and are choosing to resist in very visible ways.
So this deep dive into 4B, it really throws into sharp relief how these very personal choices women are making can echo and even amplify these huge societal tensions. It's a really potent example of resistance against these long-standing patriarchal structures.
And what strikes me is how the movement, controversial as it is, it really highlights this undeniable shift in women's agency, how their priorities within South Korean society are evolving.
So if you're thinking about the future of gender roles, societal norms, not just in Korea, but maybe elsewhere too, this deep dive certainly shows how radical individual choices, even choices with maybe unforeseen consequences like a collapsing birth rate, can become these really powerful forces for change on a bigger scale.
Which kind of leaves us with a question for you, the listener, doesn't it? In this world we're in, with so much information, shifting social pressures, how might we as individuals decide to define our own breakthroughs? How do we push back against the expectations around us? And what could the collective impact of all those individual choices actually turn out to be?